Welcome back. You're up to Module 7. You've made it to the third stage in this three-step system, which is Module 7, which is all around occupancy drivers. These are the strategic sales levers that you can use to take yourself from having a booking trickle to a booking flood. And I need to share with you my own personal experiences because it's in this sales environment that I actually began my journey in the hotel industry. And the question was, how do you actually sell a hotel? And I was actually quite confused. Even though I applied for this job as the sales manager at the property, I didn't really know what I was in for because I just thought, you got to remember this is in the early days of what if, and I just thought hotels sold themselves. I just thought people would book them by being online or ring up the hotel and they just sold themselves. So what is the role of a salesperson in a hotel? So that's where I began, but ultimately this is my core. This module here is where I did most of my work starting out in the industry. Sure, I did some general food and beverage experience, but this was my first corporate role that actually helped me cut my teeth into the industry. So I'm looking forward to sharing this content with you today. How do you sell a hotel? How do you sell a hotel room? And no, they don't just sell themselves. There are some things that you can do to actually take control of it. And this is, as the title suggests, some occupancy drivers, some actions that you can take to make an influence, rather than being at the whim of the market and just sitting back going, oh, well, it's quiet this month. Okay, what can you do early in the piece, late in the game, with regards to driving the occupancy? So we've got a number of modules, sections I want to work through here, and the first one is all around the frontline experience at your property. So what do guests experience? And no, that is not the right frontline experience. So just a little pun there, not on the front line and getting hammered by guests. What I'm talking about is, what is the experience that people have when they call your hotel, email your hotel, arrive at your hotel, inquire about booking at your hotel. So we need to get that right. So this is at the very much at the reception desk level, not necessarily a sales manager's role, but for many of you, you're running smaller operations perhaps, and there's only 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 on staff. Many of you would wear these hats. So it's very important we cover off on this end. But if it's not you, if you're sitting back in a more managerial level, well then certainly these are some of the things you can put in place on the front line. So let's dig right into it. So it's all around frontline experience and team development. So the first one is, we really think you need to get your standards right and your expectations of your staff or yourself right at the front desk. So you need to have clear systems and procedures in place. And to me, this leads first and foremost to what I call killer questions. So there needs to be certain questions that you want your staff asking. And I'm thinking about the situation of when somebody rings up and says, hi, I'm looking to book a room at your property. All right, so what is the sequence of questioning that we put in place, and what template can we give the staff to ask? Because depending on the questions being asked or who takes control of the conversation is very dependent on where it leads to. So we like to train our frontline staff to very much take control of the conversation and be the ones asking the questions, rather than just being at the whim of, do you have a room? How much? Oh, these are my dates. So if we can flip it really early and take control of that process is the goal. So killer questions begin like, I always like to start with, let's just say the question came in, hey, I'd like to book a room at your property. The first thing is I start to get perspective on date, when are you wanting to stay? So that's the first question, and word it as nice or flowery or as abrupt as you like to for your hotel. But basically, when are you looking to stay? Because that frames up a whole lot of things. If it's a busy date and you're already booked out or close to being booked out, it's going to change the tone of the conversation as opposed to whether it's really quiet. And that's, there's a sequence that will suit your hotel as others, but that's where everything should start. So personally, I like to go with, when are you looking to stay? How many people are you looking to have stay with us? And those 2 questions they buy you a bit of time. They get the guests talking and answering questions, and they buy you time to bring, or for the front office staff to bring the system up, bring the calendar up, see what's happening, have the information available to them, and start to prepare their answers when it comes to the ultimate question that's going to come is around rate. So when somebody jumps on the phone and says, how much for a room? we need to flip it around and say, no problem, when are you looking to stay? Thank you. How many people are you looking to have stay with us? Another question, I've actually learnt this off a couple of my clients, is what are you coming for? So build that somewhere in your sequence, and it might be further down the conversation, but what are you coming for is a great question because A, it's building conversation and relationship with the guest already, but also it gives you a heads up on things that are happening in town where you get to hear of an event that you just didn't have on the radar, didn't have in your events calendar, and all of a sudden you're aware of it. So that's a very valuable question to ask, and all of a sudden if you know there's a big concert coming to town, for instance, you go, wow, here's an opportunity for yielding, which we'll talk about in later modules, but it's really powerful there. So lesson number one in this first section around Frontline's experience is be quite methodical and precise around the questions that you'd like your staff to be asking, because it gives them power, gives them time, and it allows them to adhere to the other instructions that you're no doubt giving them around, we want you to sell at these rates, or we want you to do an upsell, whatever. But if you've given them the structure up front, the questions to ask, it'll allow them to fulfill your other needs that you have of the front desk. And hand in hand with those killer questions is, I guess I just call it awareness and communication. So you need to equip your team with a good PMS system. So if they've got a computer in front of them, it needs to be fast, it needs to be always open and ready to go to that calendar view so they can pull up the latest rates. Because certainly if you're running with dynamic pricing, it's not just a blanket 120 for a night. That's not the conversation we want to be having. We want to be pulling the rates in. We want to start to feel the guest out before we probably go quoting too much. And so having that awareness and communication, and some of this will be historical data, some of it will be goals and targets you've got for the night, the day, the week, the month even. And so everyone's on the same page and they can quickly reference to, you know, what our holdings are for 3 months down the track, and we get an inquiry for that month, we can go, oh, we're quiet. So if we've informed them, keep them up to speed and have that information readily available, either via the system or via, you know, helpful tools and resources around them, it helps them have those conversations. You know, so as an example, if you've identified a quiet period and you've said, right, we're going to put a special on in, let's just say, April. It's late April, and let's say we're a couple of months out from there. We've identified a quiet period, so we've put on a breakfast special, for want of a better idea. And so then we obviously need to communicate that to them through obviously team meetings, but reinforce it through relevant information and reminders around that desk environment. And also obviously the deal goes into the PMS system for it to be seen there. But if they're aware of it and somebody says, yes, I'm looking to book later in April, around the 24th, and hopefully that triggers the front desk staff to go, oh, that's a quiet period, we have a deal. And straight away, they can actually frame it up and say, oh, we've actually got some specials running on that period. And it just builds that rapport with the client. They're going, oh, wow, I'm getting value, this is really good. So that it all comes from having that communication and awareness there. You know, they need to be able to operate fast, accurately, and be optimized for your goals, for whatever you're trying to achieve, whatever strategy you're putting in place to fill low periods or yield high periods, that needs to be front and center for them so they can craft their questions around it. Another one around killer questions that are a really good tip I like to put in place. This is just sort of, to me, sales 101. You ask when they want to stay, how many people, what sort of room type you're looking for, that sort of have that series of questions that suits your property. And at some point it's going to be how much for that room. They're either going to ask or it's time for you to tell them how much for the room. So this is the crutch point. And bookings are won and lost at this point right here. So let's just say the person's looking for $100 room. And you put up and say, yep, we've got a room there for you, it's 120. Now if they're price sensitive, what they'll do, you'll get a response from them. So my encouragement is to frontline staff is when you state a rate, shut up. Just allow 2 or 3 seconds of silence to see if you can get a response. So don't jump in with, it's 120, but we can discount it for you. Okay, if you're being given scope, if the frontline staff are being given scope to discount, train them to discount after a pause. So, oh, a room on that night would be $120, madam. Pause, and you'll get a response. It's either going to be, oh, it might only be, oh, it might be, oh, that's dearer than I was hoping. So they might give you more information. Alternatively, they might just go, yep, okay, lock it in. You were prepared to drop it down to 100, but because you paused and allowed them to speak next first, this is negotiations 101. You speak, let them speak next. The person who speaks next loses. Let them speak or respond and get some feedback from the call to make a decision about what your next move is. So alternatively, if they don't go, yep, book it in, and they go, oh, that's dearer than I hoped, then you can open up a conversation and say, well, you know what, look, there's probably something I can do for you. So you want to keep that avenue open. You don't want to make the 120 final. So you sort of leave it on a high note and pause. Oh, a room on that night is 120. Leave it open, but, so if you get that poor response, but look, I might be able to do something for you. Leave it with me, bang, 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 and you're going to offer a rate. Or you may retort with another question, look, what were you hoping for? Our normal rate is 120, but we've normally got them at 140. Tonight we've got them at 120. Is there, you know, what would you book it at tonight? So training them around those sales skills 101, negotiation skills 101. The key message in that is state rate, pause. So really take that one on board, and I think you'll actually find yourself yielding the property and not discounting when you don't have to if you have that conversation. Because you don't know who's on the other end of the phone. You don't know whether they're a millionaire or really doing it tough. And everyone's trying to find a deal, I know, but you don't know what their tolerance is. They might just accept it and go, yep, that sounds great. You know, and sometimes it'll be you rate 100, you quote 120 and they would have been willing to pay 150. You don't know that, but that's the approach you can do to start to optimize the pricing that you're getting from the front desk. Another thing to do on the front desk is all around authority and upselling. So you've got to give the authority for people to have that conversation I was just talking about. So it's not just this blanket, there's the rates, cop it sweet. Because you'd hate to think if there's somebody on the other end of the phone that for $5 or for $10 would have stayed with you. You know, if they're ringing up at 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock at night saying, have you got a room? And for $10 they went elsewhere, you're better off having that revenue in your hotel than in somebody else's. So you don't let those opportunities fly by. Therefore, your frontline staff who are there at a time when management possibly isn't, you need to give them the authority to make those calls within a framework. And we'll talk about pricing floors and ceilings in a moment, but within a framework, they've got an authority to move and shift if they need to, if they're trained appropriately, if they have their killer questions set up properly. So they can make on-the-spot decisions. Just like with upselling, we need to have them educated around, well, what are the opportunities to upsell? If somebody books a room, what can we be getting them else, you know, is it the breakfast we're trying to upsell? And what else can we get them into and give the staff that instruction and the authority to make those offers? So in line with that is that pricing floors and ceilings, or what I call scaffolds. Basically where you can do this on a macro level, like on this month, or this week, this is the guide that I want to from a pricing perspective. But the more practical application is on an evening. As the management is leaving, for instance, and you might have somebody manning the desk, you can say, look, we're holding, we've got X number of rooms up our sleeves. I'd love to offload some of those. So the current price that we've got in the market is $150. I'm happy for you to discount down a couple of tiers to say $120. But that's the minimum. Don't just jump straight to it. I'm happy for you to go down there for tonight's bookings. But you might equally give them a scaffold for a period of time coming up. So you might have a high demand period where you're asking for a higher rate, say $200. But somebody rings up, the guidance you might want to give them is say, well, don't miss, if 200 would be nice to get, but we're not absolutely sure we're going to fill, so I'd be happy to cop 180. If we got 200 automatically in the channels, great, but I'd cop an over the phone direct booking at 180. So don't miss those opportunities for the direct bookings. Like certainly if you just don't want somebody to hop off, go back on the OTAs, or worst cases they book somewhere else, but second worst cases they go off and they book you anyway, but they're booked via the OTA. So always remember you've got that buffer of the commission to have a bit of a play with there, but you've got to give them that structure and that that guidance and scaffolds, pricing floors and ceilings, depending on whether it's high demand or low demand. Give them some instruction and framework to operate within. So it all comes down to clear communication and guidance and instruction to your frontline staff to allow them to operate in that framework, either on a daily basis or even just on a night shift sort of basis. That is becoming a little bit more advanced, but so you get it right, it's highly valuable and helps you maximise the dollars in your property. It comes down to some of the skill levels you've got as well, so have a good think about that. So that's frontline experience, and I think it's really important. You know, we go to all the trouble of getting this inquiry and traffic. It's important how we set those teams up so they represent our property properly, not only from a guest experience point of view, that's really important, that's hospitality 101. So you've got to do all the nice stuff, but we also need to be smart about it and have ourselves in control of the conversation in line with our goals and our priorities, and making sure we can maximise every opportunity along the way.